Imagine this. You spend your entire childhood trying to please your parents, desperately seeking their approval, only to be met with indifference and unfairness. They have their golden child, and you're nothing more than a shadow in your own family. But one day, you decide to break free from their toxic control, silently building a new life, a life they never believed you could have. This is my story. My name is Sophia, and if there's one thing I know for sure, it's that I was never truly considered an important part of my family. My parents, James and Laura, had 2 children, me and my younger brother, Noah. But while I was simply the firstborn, Noah was the golden boy. From the moment he was born, I became nothing more than a shadow in my own home. Noah was everything my parents wanted, a lively, charming boy who captured everyone's attention. Relatives, family friends, even strangers would fawn over him, while I stood quietly beside him, forgotten. At first, I didn't think much of it. I was young and assumed my parents were just busier with my little brother. But as time passed, I began to see the clear divide between us. I was a quiet, thoughtful child who loved reading and drawing, while Noah was energetic and always the center of attention. Everything in our house revolved around him. If I got top grades in school, my mother would barely acknowledge it with a simple, "That's nice," before turning to praise Noah for tying his shoelaces by himself. My birthdays were small and uneventful, while Noah's were grand celebrations filled with gifts and guests. If I wanted to watch my favorite TV show, all he had to do was whine a little, and my parents would change the channel for him. Noah quickly realized the power he held in the family and used it to his advantage. He wasn't just the favored child. He made sure I knew I was the forgotten one. If I liked something, Noah would demand to have it. If I had plans to go out, he would sulk just enough for my parents to make me cancel. The older I got, the clearer it became. It wasn't that I was unworthy of love. It was that my parents had simply never chosen to give it to me. Growing up in a family like mine, I quickly realized that if I wanted to escape my invisible existence, I had to find my own way. I couldn't rely on my parents, because to them, I had never truly mattered. My only chance was to leave this place and build a life I could be proud of, a life where I was no longer living in Noah's shadow. I had always been an outstanding student, not because I wanted my parents' recognition, but because I knew that education was my only ticket out. When it was time to choose a university, I put everything I had into securing a scholarship at a prestigious college in another state. And I did it. For the first time in my life, I felt free until my parents found out. Instead of being proud of me, they immediately objected. They told me there was no need to go so far, that there were plenty of good schools nearby. But the real reason was obvious. My parents didn't want Noah to feel left behind. They outright said that if I attended a prestigious college while Noah went to an average one, he would feel inferior. That wouldn't be fair to Noah. Not fair to Noah. What about me? I had lived my entire life in unfairness. Yet the moment I finally had a chance to change my future, I was expected to give it up for my brother's feelings. I knew there was no way to convince them, so I pretended to agree. I told them I would stay at a local college on one condition: I would be allowed to live in the dorms. They eagerly agreed, thinking they had succeeded in keeping me under control. But what they didn't know was that, once again, I had a plan of my own. Leaving home felt like breaking free from an invisible cage that had trapped me for years. But even though I had escaped my parents' control, I still had to be careful. They still believed I was attending a local university, while in reality, I had enrolled in the prestigious school I had always dreamed of. Nothing about this was easy. Even with my scholarship, I had to cover many living expenses on my own. But I never complained. I took on part-time jobs, saved every penny, and cherished every moment of living a life that was truly mine. For the first time, I didn't have to worry about whether my choices would make Noah feel bad or whether I was doing enough to please my parents. I was free to be myself, and that feeling was incredible. The years at university passed quickly. I worked hard, seized every opportunity, and made sure to build a future for myself. I landed an internship at a top financial firm, built strong connections, and steadily worked toward my dreams. During this time, I kept minimal contact with my family, just a few phone calls during the holidays to keep up appearances. They had never really cared about my life, so keeping secrets wasn't difficult. 2 years later, I graduated with top honors and secured a 6-figure salary. I had achieved something they never believed I could. I had taken control of my own destiny without their help or approval. But instead of feeling triumphant, I was left with an unexpected emptiness. A part of me had always wished for a loving family, had hoped that one day my parents would look at me with pride. But even after achieving everything they had never imagined, it didn't change the fact that I had never been a priority to them. Still, I had no regrets. I had carved out my own path, and whether or not my family acknowledged it, I knew I deserved this life. I thought I could continue moving forward, leaving them behind for good. But then, one day, I received an unexpected call from my father, and everything began to change. One weekend morning, as I was enjoying a rare day off, after a long and exhausting work week, my phone suddenly rang. I glanced at the screen and froze. It was my father's number. For the past 2 years, calls from my family had only come during holidays, and even then they had never reached out just to check on me. I hesitated for a few seconds before finally answering. My father's deep, firm voice came through the line, just as I remembered. He didn't ask how I was doing, didn't show any concern for my life. Instead, he got straight to the point. "Noah is getting married. We want you to come home early to help with the preparations." I almost laughed at the absurdity of it all. No greeting, no warmth, just a direct order. And the funniest part, after all these years, my father still believed that all he had to do was demand something, and I would blindly obey. I kept my voice calm and polite as I replied, "I don't think I'll be able to come. My job keeps me very busy." But I should have known that my father wouldn't accept that so easily. He immediately switched tactics. His tone softened, but the pressure was still there. He spoke about family, about responsibility, about how I shouldn't be the only one absent on my brother's big day. And when I still didn't waver, he resorted to threats. "If you don't come home, I'll stop paying for your tuition," he said, as if that were the ultimate weapon. I sighed quietly. He still didn't know. They had no idea that I had already graduated a year ago, that I had secured a high-paying job, making more than he ever had. And just like before, his concern wasn't about me. It was about maintaining the family's image in front of relatives and friends. I hesitated for a brief moment before deciding to say the one thing that would truly shock him. "I've already graduated, and I'm making 10 times your income." Silence filled the other end of the line. I could almost picture his face, shocked, furious, perhaps even slightly bewildered. I had been waiting for this moment for a long time, but instead of feeling victorious, I just felt empty. After a long silence, my father finally spoke, but his voice no longer carried the calm authority it once did. He began accusing me of betraying the family, of being ungrateful after everything they had done for me. I wasn't surprised. He had always believed that everything he did was for the good of the family. But in reality, it had always been about Noah and their public image. When blaming me didn't work, he switched tactics, insisting that I had to attend the wedding to preserve the family's reputation. I almost laughed. So in the end, it was never about me. It was about appearances. But I wasn't that little girl anymore. I coldly replied, "I don't care about the family's reputation, and I have no reason to attend the wedding of a brother who never saw me as his sister." That made my father furious. He threatened to cut me off from the family if I refused to come. But his words meant nothing. I had spent my entire childhood being invisible to them, and now he thought he could erase me, as if I hadn't already been erased years ago. I hung up before he could say anything else. I thought that was the end of it. But I had underestimated their desperation. A few days later, my mother called. this time sobbing, begging me to come to the wedding. She said she missed me, that the family needed me, that this was a chance to rebuild what was lost. But I didn't believe it anymore. If they truly needed me, why did it take a crisis for them to remember I existed? I answered coldly, if I never mattered all these years, then Noah's wedding doesn't matter to me. And with that, I hung up, for good. But the real surprise came a few days later. I received a call from my aunt, who told me that Noah's wedding had been called off. His so-called perfect fiancé had actually been a con artist. She had convinced the entire family to invest in a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity before disappearing with all their money. Not only had they lost their entire savings, but my parents were now at risk of losing their home after using it as collateral for a loan. For the first time, their perfect little world had completely fallen apart, and I couldn't deny that, deep down, a part of me felt satisfied that they were finally experiencing the kind of injustice I had endured my entire life. In the days that followed, I thought I had finally freed myself from my family and could now live in peace, but I was wrong. When people are desperate, they cling to anything that might save them, and now my parents were clinging to me. At first, it was endless calls from unknown numbers. I knew it was them, but I never answered. Then, one evening after work, I was startled to find my parents standing right in front of my apartment door. They looked more worn down than I had ever seen them. My father had lost his usual commanding presence, and my mother's eyes were swollen, probably from crying too much. But none of that made me feel any sympathy. "Why are you here?" I asked coldly. My mother rushed forward, grabbing my hands, her voice trembling. "Sophia, please. We were wrong, but we're still family. You can't abandon us in our time of need." I looked at them, and for the first time in my life, they didn't seem as powerful as they once did. They were just two desperate people grasping at whatever was left. But I also remembered all the years they ignored me, the times I longed for even the smallest bit of attention, only to be met with indifference. "Why do you remember me now?" I asked, my tone steady. "Where were you when I needed you? When I worked so hard just to be noticed, where were you? I was never your daughter. I was just a stranger living in the same house as Noah." Even in his downfall, my father still tried to hold on to his pride. "No matter what, you are our daughter. You have a responsibility to help your family." I let out a small laugh. "Family? When did you ever treat me like family?" I didn't wait for an answer. I turned around and slammed the door in their faces. But it didn't stop there. A few days later, Noah showed up. He knocked repeatedly, and when I opened the door, his eyes were red and puffy. "Please, sis, I've lost everything." I looked at him, the brother who had everything I never had. And now that he had lost it all, he was looking to me to save him. I simply said, "Now you know how I felt." And then I closed the door. I had endured enough. Now I was choosing my life. I thought that after closing the final door on my family, they would still try to come back. But no, they must have realized that I was no longer the person they once controlled. I was no longer the little girl who craved their love, no longer the daughter they could manipulate. I had walked away, and this time I wasn't looking back. My life only got better from there. I kept working hard, climbing the career ladder, and eventually bought a home of my own. A place I could finally call home without being haunted by painful memories. No one could push me aside anymore. Meanwhile, my former family continued their downward spiral. With no money and no reputation left, my parents couldn't rebuild their business. They were forced to move into a tiny apartment, far from the luxury they once flaunted. And Noah? Without their support, he finally had to learn what it meant to stand on his own. I didn't care how he was doing, but one thing was certain. For the first time in his life, Noah had to face the same harsh reality I had endured for years. It's funny, really. My whole life, I was treated like an outsider, as if I never mattered. But when I left, they were the ones who lost everything. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I simply didn't care. And that was my greatest victory. I was no longer the forgotten girl in the shadows of my own family. I had stepped into the light, creating a life of my own. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need an apology, because I had learned the most important lesson of all. Family isn't where you're born. It's where you are truly loved and valued. I had friends, a fulfilling life, and, most importantly, I had myself. And that was all I ever needed. This story delivers a profound lesson. Family isn't just about shared blood, but about those who truly love and value us. In life, not everyone is fortunate enough to be born into a family that is fair and caring. Sometimes, the very people who should protect us are the ones who hurt us first. But the important thing is that we are not bound by our past or by the unfairness of others. Recognition doesn't always come from family, and we don't need validation from those who never truly valued us. True strength lies in rising above, in building the life we deserve. Forgiveness isn't always necessary. Sometimes letting go and no longer caring is the greatest form of freedom. In the end, success is not about revenge. It is proof that we never needed anyone else to define our worth. When we learn to love ourselves and surround ourselves with people who genuinely care, that is the greatest victory of all. If you enjoy deep, emotional, and meaningful stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new update. Your support is the motivation that drives us to keep bringing you powerful stories. Once again, thank you for being here, and see you in the next story.